All right, well, let's turn back to 2 Kings. We're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 20 this evening. Start off here with a little story. September the 9th, 1986, there were two Russian ships that collided in the Black Sea in a tragic accident. That was one of the worst that was in the country's history. One of the ships was a freighter ship carrying a load of oats, was lightly manned, but the other, a 17,000-ton, 525-foot liner, was carrying 1,234 people. Although there was almost no damage to the freighter, the liner was ripped apart and started to sink within about 15 minutes of the collision after that accident, leaving no time for the crew to launch lifeboats. Well, nearly 400 people met their death that night, and they drowned in the accident, which investigators later determined could have actually been pretty much avoided. Neither ship had malfunctioning technology. That wasn't the issue. And there were no weather conditions that night also, so that could not have been blamed either. Instead, the accident was due to human pride. The captains of both ships knew that they were on a collision course about 45 minutes before the impact. And they could have steered clear of each other, but they trusted instead in their own skill and refused to yield to each other. In fact, the freighter captain sent a message that essentially said about this: both men were later arrested and charged with gross negligence and carelessness in such a tragedy, all due to the state of pride. When the study of the life of Hezekiah, there are valuable lessons about what it means to be a dark horse, one that is the one that rises to the surface, that's not thought of really as a big player. But one of the most important dark horse qualities is a full humility, not pride. See, a dark horse knows that overcoming obstacles and finding confidence and strength to rise to victory are not solo acts. See, Hezekiah had to learn about humility in a unique way. Between 2 Kings 19 and also chapter number 20, Hezekiah's problems were just piling up. Remember we talked about this, about where it seems like that when there's one problem, it seems like there's another and it just keeps accumulating. Well, he was dealing with the threat of Assyria surrounding Jerusalem. His people were panicking, wondering, what are we going to do? The Assyrians are much stronger. And losing confidence, and Sennacherib and Rabshakeh mocking his faith in God, who both wanted to decimate the land. And to top it off, something else happens. So Hezekiah's got all these things piled on top of him. He's all these things he's having to deal with. And then to top it off, he gets sick. Look what it says here in 2 Kings 20, verse number 1. It says, "In those days was Hezekiah sick unto death. And the prophet Isaiah the son of Amos came to him and saith unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Set thine house in order, for thou shalt die and not live." Now, it's not clear exactly what Hezekiah had. Now, I've heard some commentators state this, in which I'm not really convinced that this is the case, that when the Lord took out the Assyrian army, that there was some type of plague that he sent down and killed them, and Hezekiah was affected by that. Well, I don't really agree with that, because I don't think that the Lord would send something to actually attach to his man as well. But no one really knows what Hezekiah had here, what condition he had that made him sick. But the Bible does mention in verse number 7 about a boil. B-O-I-L. Now, in the Hebrew language, this indicated an inflammation or ulcer that would have been extremely painful. Now, I don't know of anybody in here that has had an ulcer before, but I haven't, knock on wood, I've not had an ulcer before, but I've heard of some people who say that they're very painful, they're very hard to get rid of, and it's very uncomfortable, and you really just don't want to do anything. But he was so sick and in so much pain, he was basically bedridden. He was in a pretty bad state here, and he cried to the Lord for help. See, God is aware of when we're in pain. He knows when we're struggling. He knows when we're hurting. David even said that God keeps a record of every time we cry. Look what it says in Psalm 56, verse number 8. I'll have to look up this verse here. I'll have our screen going here. It says, Thou tellest my wanderings, put thou my tears into thy bottle, are they not in thy book? See, it may seem at times that God has forsaken us. However, this just isn't the case. He has simply allowed us to experience troubles in order to strengthen our faith in Him. See, the things that we experience in life, the hardships, the troubles, number of his months are with thee. Thou hast appointed his bounds that he cannot pass. But let's just imagine that someone could tell you when you're going to die. You know, I'm not trying to be all gloom and doom here, but this is just what we're dealing with, the verses. And like Hezekiah, you were very sick and you only had a few weeks to live. You were told, you're sick, you're going to die. How would you respond? How would you respond if someone told you that you have a week, you have 2 weeks? Would you be on the next flight to go see Mickey Mouse? Oh, I mean, everybody says we're going to the Disney World, going to Disneyland. I got to see it before I die. Or would you want to go do something that you want to mark off? People have their bucket list. They want to go do all these amazing, see all these sights of the world before they die. But what would you do? You know, I think in life there's a lot of time that we waste. How much time do we spend doing things that we enjoy? What do we do in times of wasting? I mean, there's been studies that have been done on this showing how people, when they sleep, watching TV, just wasting time away. See, life doesn't have a visible game clock, and we don't know how much time we left here on this earth. But Hezekiah knew his time was almost up because God sent him a message through Isaiah saying, what I just read to you here, and the prophet Isaiah the son of Amos came to him and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, set thine house in order, for thou shalt die and not live. You know what he's telling him here? He's telling him he's going to die from sickness and he needed to prepare for his death. This meant he probably needed to go and get some things in order. Finances in order, make sure his family was taken care of, training the next king of Judah. We don't know, but there's a lot of things that needed to be taken into consideration to get in order. You know, often we think the big question that I always like to present to people, especially when I'm speaking to a group that I've never met before, are you prepared to meet God? You know, that's just an honest, just a very simple question. Are you prepared to meet the God of the universe, the God of all creation? That's important. But here we see that not only that, but also to, number 2, eliminate pride. Now, when Hezekiah found out he was going to die, the Bible says he turned his face to the wall and prayed unto the Lord. This is what it says here in verse number 2 of chapter number 20. He prayed a prayer that many of us would consider maybe a self-righteous prayer. Look what it says here in 2 Kings 20, verse number 3. I beseech thee, O Lord, remember now how I have walked before thee in truth and with a perfect heart, and have done that which is good in thy sight. And Hezekiah wept sore. He was brokenhearted. He had a very contrite heart. He was very broken in the fact of knowing that this is it. He's been given this news. He has done all that he can do. He has prayed for his people. He has been through all these circumstances, all these trials. His father, King Ahaz, he has come in, he's reversed everything, and now he's given the news, your time is up. You know, one thing I think of is that he wanted to see the people succeed. He wanted to see what would happen here. And I don't really think that Hezekiah was being self-righteous here in this situation. To some, a reader may think that. But see, under the Old Covenant, this was a valid principle on which to approach God with the way that He spoke. Passages like Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28 show that under the Old Covenant, blessing or cursing was sent by God on the basis of obedience or disobedience. So this was an appropriate, contrite, just broken individual coming before God. Like what it says here, we got the verses back up again. Psalm 15, verses 1 through 2 says, the Psalm of David, Lord, who shall abide in thy tabernacle? Who shall dwell in thy holy hill? He that walketh uprightly, and worketh righteousness, and speaketh the truth in his heart. I believe that it was a natural human emotion Hezekiah was experiencing. I mean, how would you respond if you've just been told your time is up? You're going to meet your death. You know, doesn't it always seem more unfair whenever bad things happen to good people? You know, I always ask that question. You know, the Bible says the rain falls on the just and the unjust. When bad things happen to good people, even though he made mistakes in his life, Hezekiah was a good. He was a faithful and upright man. Was he perfect? No. But he was upright. He did those things that pleased the Lord. He made a big difference from what his king or his father, King Ahaz, had done. He made a drastic change from that. He wept because he knew his job as king of Judah wasn't done. I believe that's the reason why. He wanted more time to see Assyria defeated. But then something happened, which is good for all of us, and it's promising. Is God answered Hezekiah's request and sent Isaiah with some great news. Look what it says here in verses 4 through 6. And it came to pass, afore Isaiah was gone out in the middle of the court, that the word of the Lord came to him, saying, Turn again and tell Hezekiah, the captain of my people, Thus saith the Lord, the God of David my father, I have heard thy prayer. You know, we've heard this once before. I have heard thy prayer. I have seen thy tears. Behold, I will heal thee. On the third day thou shalt go up unto the house of the Lord. And I will add unto thy days 15 years, and I will deliver thee and this city out of the hand of the king of Assyria, and I will defend this city for mine own sake and for my servant David's sake. See, at the end of verse number 6, God said He would heal Hezekiah, and He's going to rescue Judah. For mine own sake and for my servant David's sake. He was going to give him an extra time. But not because Hezekiah was a good person. No, it wasn't because Hezekiah was good or had done such great things to actually deserve this. God was going to heal Hezekiah for His glory. That's what He was going to heal him for. See, you got to remember that God's promises are based not upon who we are, but on who He is. That's important to recognize. See, if you've been saved, you've received the grace of God, and as a result, you have access to the blessings of God and promises. And these are only available because of what God has done. That's why they're available. Like what it says here in 1 Corinthians 15, verse number 10. But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And His grace which was bestowed upon me was not in vain, but I labored more abundantly than they all. Yet not I, but the grace of God which was with me. Now, this is a really neat and just miraculous passage about what's coming up here next. But what happens is a true miracle in 2 Kings 20, verses 7 through 11. Let's read this. And Isaiah said, Take a lump of figs, and they took and laid it on the bull, and he recovered. Now, this was for medicinal purposes. They used some type of fig, and they laid it on it, and his injury, the inflammation was completely gone. I mean, that's a miracle. That's a miracle of God for that to actually happen. And then verse number 8, it says, And Hezekiah said unto Isaiah, What shall be the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up into the house of the Lord the third day? And Isaiah said, This sign shalt thou have of the Lord, that the Lord will do the thing that He has spoken. Shall the shadow go forward 10 degrees? Now we'll talk about that here in just a moment. Or go back 10 degrees? And Hezekiah answered, Isn't it a light thing for the shadow to go down 10 degrees, but let the shadow return backward 10 degrees. And Isaiah the prophet cried unto the Lord, and he brought the shadow 10 degrees backward, by which it had gone down in the dial of Ahaz. What in the world is the dial of Ahaz? What is that? Do you know what the dial of Ahaz is? Well, the dial of Ahaz was a device. It's the first known piece of time known in the history of man, okay? And so his father, King Ahaz, created this dial. It's a sundial. It is a way to tell time that isn't like a watch that clicks, and it's not like a clock that strikes. But what it was a dial, and the shadow that was cast upon it by the sun allowed people to know what time it was through the day. So, he wants a sign. Hezekiah wants a sign, and Isaiah says this, shall it go forward or go backward? Well, Hezekiah thought to himself, well, wait a minute, going forward is easy. What about going backward? Is it like going back in time? There's a lot of people thought about time travel. Could we go back? This is really interesting because there's not a lot on this passage, so it makes you just wonder about, was this in just the context of Hezekiah's life, that he experienced this going back as a way to say that your life is extended? Was this for all the world, or was this just in the context of his sitting? I don't know. Do y'all have an idea? I have no clue about that. It's only speculation. But here we see within this passage of Scripture that God does something miraculous. See, the casting of the shadow cannot, by the world's standards today, it can't go backwards. There's no way for us to, like, who sings that song? I could turn back time. That old song? Oh, no, it's like an 80s song or something. But I said, I wish I could turn back time. Well, anyways, there was no way for that to turn back on its own. It was only by a miracle of God that the shadow moved backwards. This was the sign that was given by God to Hezekiah, that he would be healed and he would live longer. Now, hopefully I explained that good, because it is a little challenging and there's not much on it. When you look at the dial of Ahaz, I think that may be, Max, you may know, I think that's the only reference that we see in the Bible of the dial of Ahaz. But that is a known that's thousands of years ago, the only way that they could tell time, and that was created by King Ahaz. That was Hezekiah's father. So, that's miraculous there. Now, let's look at this. Let's exclaim the goodness of God. Now, if you were Hezekiah, and you woke up the next morning, though, and you had been given a second chance of life, how would you respond? Well, I'm reminded, we're almost to Christmas, right? Can we go and start jingle belling it? So, but y'all know the story. Charles Dickens, 1843, A Christmas Carol. You know what happens to Ebenezer Scrooge? Ebenezer, he is the stingiest person. He won't give anything. Bob Cratchit, he was just all over him. Just a mean, wretched, just old man. Well, that night, he met the ghost of Christmas, past, present, and future. And they all told him about what had happened, what's currently going on, and what will happen if he continues living the way that he is. So what happens? Old Ebenezer has a change of heart. He wakes up the next morning, he opens those curtains up, and he says, it's Christmas. He has a big change of heart. And he comes out, and he's just celebrating. And as we know the story, he goes to Tiny Tim. Bob Cratchit gives him a big bunch of money. He's changed. Vastly different here from the comparison of what we find here with Hezekiah. See, instead of being grateful for how God had healed him, Hezekiah was filled with a little pride. The Bible says that the king of Babylon and his son asked about Hezekiah's health. And instead of telling them how grateful he was to God for healing him and blessing him, Hezekiah was filled with some pride. Look what it says here as we read verse 13, or let's back up verse number 12, and then we'll read through verse number 15. At the time, Berodachbel of Dan, that's a long name there, it's hard to pronounce, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent letters and a present unto Hezekiah, for he had heard that Hezekiah had been sick. You know, it's interesting too, like sending letters and a present to him through the midst of what's going on. But anyways, let's go here. And Hezekiah hearkened unto them and showed them all the house of his precious things, the silver and the gold and the spices and the precious ointment, all the house of his armor and all that was found in his treasures. There was nothing in his house nor in all his dominion that Hezekiah showed them not. Then came Isaiah the prophet unto King Hezekiah and said unto him, What said these men? And from whence came they unto thee? And Hezekiah said, They are come from a far country, even from Babylon. And he said, Why, or what have they seen in thine house? And Hezekiah answered, All the things that are in mine house have they seen. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not showed them. Wow. Hezekiah missed an opportunity to give God the glory, didn't he? He could have witnessed to the people of Babylon by showing them God's grace in his own life, but instead he takes them in and shows them all that he has here. But instead he took them to his trophy case, and he bragged about the things that he had accomplished, the things that he had, the things that he owned, and all of his accomplishments. And he missed a huge opportunity to exclaim the goodness and glory of God. But instead, what did he do? He exalted self. You know, one of the strange habits of the human heart is to feel proud about things we've received by grace or even had nothing to do with. See, Hezekiah tried to make himself look good, instead of pointing to the king of Babylon, or pointing the king of Babylon to the one who had done it all. He was stealing glory that belonged solely to God. But see, there's a price to be paid for things like that. There was a price to be paid for Hezekiah's pride, a price that impacted not only him personally, but future generations. See, Hezekiah's pride resulted in the captivity of his people and his family. Look what it says here in verses 16 through 18. And Isaiah said unto Hezekiah, Hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days come that all that is in thine house and that which thy fathers have laid up in store unto this day shall be carried into Babylon. Nothing shall be left. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. You know what he's saying in that trophy case? One day it's going to be empty. It's going to be gone. And then look what he says here in verse number 18. And of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the place, or the palace of the king of Babylon. You know, choices we make, oftentimes we don't think about this enough, but we should. Our choices that we make affect people around us. Choices that parents make affect their children. Choices we make affect people around us. There's a steep price that was going to be paid here. Hezekiah's actions impacted his sons and future generations to come. You know what this is called? It's called, in terminology we understand today, as being collateral damage. Collateral damage is when unintentional harm is inflicted on an unintended target. See, Hezekiah's pride caused collateral damage to his people and to his family. Was it intended to bring them harm? No. But his actions caused them great suffering for what was to come and which lied ahead. Ephesians 6, 7 through 8 says, with good will doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he be bond or free. Interesting there. Then we see here in verse number 19, it says, then said Hezekiah unto Isaiah, good is the word of the Lord which thou hast spoken. And he said, is it not good, if peace and truth be in my days? And this was a hard lesson for Hezekiah to learn after the amazing miracles he had just experienced. He could have responded with a bad attitude, but instead he accepted the consequences with an attitude of humility. You know, even with this news that was delivered, it was with an attitude of humility that he'd accepted this. And he repented of his pride. And from what the Bible tells us, he lived the rest of his life as a faithful man who gave God the glory for everything. Not too long after this, God gave him a dark horse victory by delivering Judah from Assyria and Sennacherib and blessed the nation greatly. And see, whatever good we achieve in our lives, it's not in our own power, but is due to the greatness of God. That's how it's achieved. The most important truth that we can take from this is that the heart of the dark horse is the heart of humility. And that's important for us to recognize. And we see here in verse number 21, or 20 and 21, it says, and the rest of the acts of Hezekiah and all his might, and how he made a pool and a conduit and brought water into the city, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And Hezekiah slept with his fathers, and Manasseh his son reigned in his stead. What an interesting journey that we've seen here with Hezekiah, everything that has happened in this story. See, Hezekiah surprised everybody with these victories. And he was an unlikely candidate because of his family past. But he was young and this nation was small. But the most important thing was Hezekiah was faithful and he gave God the credit for the accomplishments in his life. So he was equipped to do the work that God had called him to do. Was he perfect? No, he was not. But I'm thankful today that God, when he calls people, I'm thankful he calls those people that aren't perfect to do his will. Because if you look at me close enough, I'm not perfect. I've got fallacies in my life. I've got imperfections if you look close enough. But I'm thankful that he has chosen me to be a part of the grand scheme of his plan for spreading the news of good news of Jesus Christ. All right. What do you think about that? What do you think about the story there of Hezekiah? I would think he did. I don't know exactly how much time surpassed here, but I would think he gave him the 15 years. He'd have to date it back from when did he take reign? I keep forgetting that number. I've got a lot of numbers in my head right now. We'd have to go back and date that. I'm not for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, 15 years, 10 degrees. You know, it's just amazing, though. I guess, like I said, when I come back and read passages I haven't read in a while, this gets my mind to wondering, what does that mean? Like, I mean, we just have so little information on that. I mean, was it, when it's for the shadow to go back, time had to go, right? Wouldn't you think? Yeah. 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 Very old. No. No, he was very young when he took the reign. All I know is that if time went back and I ate something real good, I'd like to go back and eat it again. Same meal. But what's something that's really just caught your eye about everything that we discussed about him? I mean, the whole situation. What now? 54-year-old. Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about that. Like, I think you have to be, is it 34 to be president? Am I wrong about that? You might have to fact check me on that one. But, I mean, he wasn't even old enough to be president, to be like a leader. And then thinking about Josiah was 7. And he took reign. So just think about that for a moment. I mean, that's like Titus being a king, okay? So, yeah. I think one thing that really stands out to me is just everything that was thrown on him, and then the prayer that he gave when the news was delivered to him that he was going to die. But this prayer was just a prayer from the heart that really just, I think he was very broken, and I think that he prayed, and like I said earlier, when you would read this, you may think, well, he's being very just selfish, he's being very self-centered about what he's requesting prayer for. But this was just a normal prayer according to Old Testament time. I mean, the Old Covenant way of praying. I mean, this was just a very common thing. So, and something else too, Max mentioned, I think 2 Chronicles, Isaiah. See, there's a lot of parallels between these passages of Isaiah prophesying about what would happen. And so when you read these, if you do any type of a study, you'll see 2 Chronicles and you'll see 2 Kings. They'll see them mirroring each other when they're talking about this story in the context of what's going on within this time with Judah and with the Assyrians. What do y'all think type of plant that was he put on him, the bull? What type of a plant, what type of a leaf was put on the bull to heal? Or if what type of a, well, I mean, yeah, it's a fig, but what type of, yeah, I don't know that either. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It could have been. Could have been. Could have been. I would say, I think Stephen found something. Prophet Isaiah recommended using crushed figs to treat a skin disease called shikun. I think that's what it's pronounced that, which is translated as bull's or mange. Or mange. Yeah. Yeah. The mangy king. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. You know, something else I thought about too is when's the last time you prayed and you cried? You know, he was crying. This Bible says here, he said, I have seen thy tears, and behold, I will heal thee. I mean, yeah, 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 just a very he wants to see this too. He wants to see the victory. He wants to live to see these things. So, yeah, Manasseh. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like a generational thing because Ahaz was bad, and then Hezekiah was good, and then Manasseh was what? Bad. It seems like they took time about, didn't they? One would build it up, one tear it down, then the next one would build it back up again. And you almost wonder, like with Manasseh, it tells us there in chapter 21, he was 12 years old when he began to reign, and reigned 50 and 5 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was, there you go, it's Hezekiah's mother, his wife. And living and seeing your father doing these things, he had to have seen and witnessed this. What would have changed him? What would have led him astray? It almost makes you look at that.
He reigned 55 years and he was evil, right?
Yeah.
It's just mind-boggling to me how many of these kings reigned decades that were evil, and some of the ones that were good to the Lord didn't reign but a short period of time. Why does God allow that
Yeah.
to try to, to try to bring his children, to let them know that, hey, things aren't always
Mm-hmm.
a bed of roses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts? What we've covered? Well, if you look back at like the Assyrians and like their historical, there's references there, and then like non-Bible, there's references to that. I personally think I've seen pictures of it. It almost like a ball in a way that's cut off at the top, and then there's little markings that's made in it, and it almost looks like your clock today with the hands, and then I think like if it was laid a certain way, somehow I may be incorrect about this. I'm just trying to give the best explanation I can. But the way the sun would hit, the shadow would show with the way that it's placed, and which I don't know if the way it was positioned or where they set it. I don't know. But when they looked, they would be able to know what time in the day it was. Now, I don't think they called it like 4 a.m. or anything like that. I think they just speculating here. They called it different times of the day. What that was, I'm not really that certain for sure. Solar powered. Yeah. But like the shadow, like we've mentioned earlier, I think Bud made this point about the shadow, like the sun. I mean, if you pay attention, I mean, just how the sun moves, the shadow moves throughout the day. So obviously they would have known night, you get up, the sun obviously rises, and then as it moves, this description would have showed what periods of time in the day it was, and then obviously when the sun would begin to set, then it was nighttime. So there was a way to tell. I think that's what I saw earlier. I don't know if that's exactly what it looked like, but I've seen that same picture as a description of what a sundial possibly looked like. See, it's got that shape right there, and as its shadow, the sun, it would cast a shadow wherever they placed it at, and it would tell the time. So I don't know. We're just speculating here. There's very limited information on it. So
I've seen them when they're flat.
yeah.
Something that's kind of an angle sitting there, and then you have to position the thing just right, and then the sun hits that, and then you can watch the shadow as the
Yeah.
sun turns.
Well, if we had to carry those things with us everywhere we went. Now, that's right. You'd have to lay it down, know where it's at. Don't forget our sundial, guys. Let's bring it back. But it's interesting when you think about that, though, and it was created by, of all the wickedness, King Ahaz was the one who implemented this, the creation of that. So you have to give him a little credit. He was brilliant. Maybe his advisors was in helping creating this. But yeah. 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 Well, and I've said this before. Like I've been to Egypt before, and I've been to the pyramids. I've been inside of some of them. I've been to the Egyptian museum there. The Egyptians were brilliant. I mean, very smart. I'll never forget going and seeing a actual like foot prop that they had on display, and there was a lot of markings on it, and the tour guide was giving us an explanation. I was very curious. I said, what is those markings there? And they said that those markings were actually their enemies, and it represented that when they had their foot up on that stool, that they were superior to their enemies. I mean, so just their way of thinking. A lot of the things they did for extracurricular activities were things that we do today. So they were smart in that aspect. Not so smart in their worship, obviously, because they worship false gods and believed in an afterlife, of sending them into the afterlife with the way they were entombed and mummified and things like that. I mean, they thought they was taking all that stuff with them. But, you don't take nothing with you. Don't matter how full that casket is or what you're buried with, you don't take it with you. But you're right, though. I mean, there's been a lot of like intelligent, interesting things have been created. You know. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's been a good study. Anybody else with a thought? remember Sunday, we're having our Thanksgiving meal right after church. So remember that. Invite someone to come with you. We're going to have a good time. And then also our veterans, we ask if you have served that you would send in a picture to the email addresses that are there and let us know so we can put your picture in the slideshow Sunday, as we'll take some time to honor all of our veterans and just remember our country and all of the armed forces and everybody that has served. We're thankful for what you have done. And so just remember all those things. Okay, let's stand up. Let's stand together and we'll pray. All right. Jerry, would you pray for us, please?